The Vietnamese people in France consist of people of Vietnamese ancestry who were born in or immigrated to France. Their population was about 400,000 as of 2017, making them one of the largest Asian communities in the country. Unlike other overseas Vietnamese communities in the West, the Vietnamese population in France had already been well established before the fall of Saigon and the resulting diaspora. They make up over half of the Vietnamese population in Europe. France was the first Western country in which Vietnamese migrants settled due to the colonization of Vietnam by France. The French assistance to Nguyen An in 1777 was one of earliest formal political relations between the two nations. Despite continued French Catholic missions, trade and military assistance to Vietnam throughout the rest of the 18th century and 19th century, Vietnam did not become a colony of France until the Cochin China campaign in the late 1850s, and Vietnamese immigration consisted of a mere trickle of mostly diplomats. During the colonial period, there was a significant representation of Vietnamese students in France, which largely consisted of members from the elite class and royal household, primarily from Cochin China. Professional and blue-collar workers, mostly from Tonkin, also migrated from Vietnam during this period, with some settling permanently. One of the few monuments dating back to these earliest waves of Vietnamese arriving in France is the Temple du Souvenir Indochinois, originally erected in 1907 and subsequently relocated to the Jardin Tropical de Paris in the Bois de Vincennes. The onset of World War I and World War II saw the French Empire recruit soldiers and locals of its colonies to volunteer with the war effort in metropolitan France. Roughly 50,000 and 20,000 Vietnamese migrated to France during these periods respectively. The wave of migrants who came during World War I was the first major presence of Vietnamese people in France. While many migrants returned to Vietnam following the war, a significant number resettled in France to work as factory workers, railroad builders, artists, and service workers, primarily in Paris and the surrounding Île-de-France region, as well as in Lille. By 1939, there were an estimated 93,000 French residents of Vietnamese descent, largely consisting of workers and soldiers, as well as students. During the interwar period, a Vietnamese community began to be concentrated in Marseille in southern France. Vietnamese-owned rice farms were also established in southeastern France, and second and third generation French Vietnamese started to run their own commercial firms or work in professional sectors, following the Geneva Accords, which granted Vietnam its independence from France. A number of Vietnamese loyal to the colonial government and Vietnamese married to French colonists emigrated to France. Hundreds of families who were evacuated out of Vietnam by the French government were largely settled in makeshift camps in the southwest of France. The most notable was in Saint-Livrade-sur-Lot near Bordeaux, which hosted the Centre d'accueil des Français d'Indochine. Most of these camps were structured in a similar layout as a traditional town in Vietnam, with a Buddhist temple, markets, schools and medical facilities. During the 1950s to the 1970s, including the Vietnam War, a number of students from South Vietnam continued to arrive in France, as well as members of the middle class involved in commerce. Although many initially returned home, as the war situation worsened, a majority decided to resettle permanently in France and brought their families along. It was during this period that Vietnamese community institutions were established to better serve both new immigrants and expatriates, as well as establish generations of Vietnamese in France. The largest influx of Vietnamese people arrived in France as refugees after the fall of Saigon and end of the Vietnam War in 1975. Early Vietnamese refugees who settled in France largely consisted of professionals who made up the middle class and elite in South Vietnam, along with those with high levels of education and those with family already present in the country. Larger waves of refugees later included South Vietnamese from different social standings. Although their average level of education and affluence was still higher than their peers who settled in North America, Australia, and the rest of Europe. France received the third highest number of refugees from Vietnam after the United States and Australia, numbering over 100,000 between 1975 and 1990. By the beginning of the 1990s, refugees had accounted for slightly over three-quarters of the Vietnamese population in France. Despite the community already being numerous before the refugee arrival, the Vietnamese American community soon surpassed its counterpart in France as the largest overseas Vietnamese population due to the much higher number of refugees resettling there.